On the morning of my only daughter's wedding, I was adjusting my silk bow tie in the mirror, thinking about the $15 million penthouse I was about to gift her. 10 minutes later, I was shoved into the trunk of my own Rolls-Royce, struggling to breathe under a heavy wool blanket. "What the hell are you doing?" I tried to yell, but a hand clamped over my mouth. It was Mikey, my driver, the man I had trusted with my life for over a decade. "Sir, please hide in here. Don't say a word, you need to hear this. Trust me," he whispered, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in a former Marine. Before I could fight back, the trunk slammed shut, plunging me into total darkness. I lay there frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs, furious and confused. Then I heard the garage door open, and the clicking of high heels on the concrete. Through the small crack between the rear seats, I saw a sliver of light and heard a voice that made my blood run cold. It was my daughter, Victoria. "Did the old man sign the papers yet?" she asked. "No, not yet," a male voice replied. It was Blake, her fiancé. "But don't worry, the sedative Patricia gave him will kick in within the hour. By the time we cut the cake, he won't even know his own name." That was the moment I stopped being a father and started being a witness to my own murder. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to uncover a betrayal so deep it shattered your entire world. I am Henry Dalton, 69 years old, and until this morning I thought I was the patriarch of a loving, loyal family. I built Dalton Logistics from a single rusty truck into a $2 billion empire. I have negotiated with union leaders in Detroit and politicians in Washington. I have survived strikes, recessions, and the death of my beloved wife 10 years ago. I thought I knew how to spot a liar. I thought I could smell a bad deal from a mile away. I was wrong. The air in the trunk of the 1962 Silver Cloud was stale, smelling of old leather and gasoline. My knees were pressed against my chest, aching with a sharp arthritic throb that I usually ignored. But in the dark, every sensation was amplified. The rough texture of the spare tire against my cheek. The muffled sound of my own shallow breathing. I wanted to kick the lid open. I wanted to scream for the security guards. But Mikey's voice echoed in my mind. "Trust me." Mikey had taken a bullet for a convoy in Fallujah. He had carried me to the hospital when I had my first heart attack. He would not do this without a reason. So I lay still, forcing my breathing to slow down, forcing the panic into a small, tight box in the back of my mind. This was a skill I learned in business. When you are cornered, you do not flail. You wait. You listen. The sound of the garage door closing was like a gunshot. Then silence. Heavy, pregnant silence. I shifted slightly, trying to find a comfortable position, but there is no comfort in a coffin. Then came the footsteps. 3 distinct sets. The sharp, aggressive click of stilettos, the heavy, confident thud of dress shoes, and a third, softer shuffle. That had to be Patricia, my wife of 2 years. My beautiful, caring Patricia, who had nursed me back to health, who organized my schedule, who swore she loved me for my soul and not my bank account. The voices drifted closer, muffled at first, then crystal clear as they stood right next to the car. "God, this garage is stifling," Blake complained. His voice was dripping with that arrogance I had always tried to overlook. I always told myself he was just ambitious. Now it sounded like pure greed. "Can we hurry this up?" he continued. "I need to make sure the catering staff doesn't steal the champagne." "Relax," Victoria said. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. This was the girl I used to read bedtime stories to. The girl I taught to ride a bike. Now she sounded like a stranger. "We have time. The lawyer isn't due for another 20 minutes. Is everything prepared for the transfer?" "Everything is ready," Patricia's voice chimed in. It was soft, the same soothing tone she used when she brought me my evening tea. I felt a physical pang in my chest, a betrayal so sharp it felt like a physical blow. "I switched his heart medication this morning," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. Replace the digoxin with a high dose of benzodiazepine. Combined with the stress of the wedding, he will be slurring his words by the ceremony. By the reception, he will be incoherent. Good Blake laughed. A dry, cruel sound. We need him to look completely senile. Once he makes a scene, Dr. Eris will be there to declare him mentally incompetent. We get the emergency conservatorship sign, the power of attorney, and ship him off to Shady Pines tonight. Shady Pines. The name hit me like a sledgehammer. It wasn't a retirement community. It was a state facility for the severely demented, a place where people were warehoused until they died. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to erase me. They were going to bury me alive in a room with barred windows and let me rot while they spent the fortune I had spent 40 years building. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. My hands clenched into fists were shaking uncontrollably. Not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. I had given Victoria everything. Private schools, horses, cars, a trust fund that ensured she would never have to work a day in her life. And this was her repayment. A plot to declare me insane on her wedding day. "Are you sure the prenup won't be an issue?" Victoria asked. I could hear the rustle of silk. She was probably checking her makeup in the side mirror of the Rolls-Royce, the very car I was trapped in. "Don't worry about the prenup," Patricia replied. "Once he is declared incompetent, I become his legal guardian. I can annul the prenup. And with Blake handling the finances, we can liquidate the logistics shares before the board even knows what hit them. We are looking at $2 billion split 3 ways, minus the fee for your father, Blake." Father. I froze. Blake's father. I knew Blake's father was out of the picture, a deadbeat who left when Blake was a kid, or so I had been told. "My dad is the best forger in the state," Blake bragged. "He has been practicing Henry's signature for months. The transfer documents are already signed. We just need the old man out of the way so he doesn't contest it." I closed my eyes in the dark. It was a conspiracy. A comprehensive, carefully architectural dismantling of my life. Patricia wasn't just a gold digger. She was part of a team. Blake wasn't just an unsuitable suitor. He was a con man. And Victoria. My Victoria. She wasn't a victim. She was the ringleader. "Make sure the driver is occupied," Victoria said suddenly. "Mikey is too loyal. If he sees Dad acting strange, he might call an ambulance." "I took care of Mikey," Blake said. "I told him to go pick up the ice sculptures across town. He won't be back for hours." I almost laughed. A bitter, silent laugh. They had underestimated Mikey. And they had underestimated me. They thought I was just a checkbook with a pulse. They forgot that you don't build a logistics empire by being soft. You do it by being 2 steps ahead of everyone else. You do it by knowing when to strike. The sound of footsteps faded as they walked back into the house. The garage door rumbled open again, letting in a blast of hot air and the chirping of birds. It sounded so normal. The world outside was celebrating a wedding, while I lay in the dark, mourning the death of my family. The trunk popped open. Light flooded in, blinding me for a second. I gasped, sucking in the fresh air, my lungs burning. Mikey's face appeared above me. He looked terrified. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked, reaching down to help me up. His strong hands gripped my arms, pulling me out of the cramped space. I stumbled, my legs numb, my back screaming in protest. I leaned against the fender of the Rolls-Royce, trying to steady my shaking hands. I heard everything I said, my voice raspy. I looked at Mikey. Really looked at him. This man who I paid a salary, who I sometimes barked orders at, had just saved my life. While my own flesh and blood plotted my destruction, the hired help was the only one standing between me and oblivion. "I recorded it," Mikey said, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. "I put a bug on the sun visor of the car when I was washing it. I knew something was wrong, boss." Patricia has been meeting Blake's dad in motel rooms for weeks. I followed them. You knew, I whispered. I suspected, he corrected. But I needed you to hear it. If I just told you, would you have believed me, Henry? Would you have believed your little girl was capable of this? I looked at the recorder in his hand. No, I wouldn't have. I would have fired him for slander. I would have defended Victoria until my dying breath. Mikey knew that. He knew he had to break my heart to save my life. Thank you, son, I said. The word son came out naturally. I realized in that moment that family isn't blood. Blood is just biology. Family is loyalty. Family is the person who pulls you out of a trunk when the world wants to lock you away. I straightened my bow tie. The panic was gone. The hurt was still there at a dull ache in the center of my chest, but the rage had crystallized into something cold and hard. A plan was forming in my mind. A plan not just to escape, but to destroy them. They wanted a show. They wanted a senile old man. I would give them a performance they would never forget. Hand me the phone, Mikey, I said. My voice steady and commanding. The voice of the CEO was back. Not your work phone. The burner. Mikey handed me a cheap prepaid phone he kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Leonard Katz, the voice said. Leo, it's Henry, I said. Henry Leonard sounded surprised. I'm just putting on my tie for the wedding. You sounded nervous yesterday. Everything okay? Listen to me carefully, Leo, I said, staring at the door leading into the house. Do not come to the wedding as a guest. Come as my attorney. Bring the Phoenix file and call the chief of police. Tell him I need a favor. The Phoenix file. Leonard paused. The silence on the line was heavy. That is the nuclear option, Henry. That liquidates everything. It triggers the blind trust. You only set that up in case of kidnapping or extortion. I am being extorted, Leo, I said, watching a spider crawl across the hood of the Rolls-Royce. By my daughter, my wife, and my future son-in-law. They are trying to verify a Section 5150 on me. Involuntary psychiatric hold. Jesus, Leonard breathed. Are you safe? I am with Mikey, I said. I am safe. But Leo, I need you to bring the forensic accountant team and the original copy of the prenup, the one with the infidelity clause. I'm on my way, Leonard said, his voice shifting from friend to shark. Give me 20 minutes. I hung up and handed the phone back to Mikey. My heart was still fluttering, likely the result of the medication Patricia had been poisoning me with for who knows how long. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pill case I always carried. I looked at the little white pills. Benzodiazepine. Sedatives. I poured them onto the concrete floor and crushed them under the heel of my dress shoe. Mikey, do you have any aspirin? I asked. Mikey nodded and ran to the glove compartment of his sedan parked in the corner. He came back with a bottle of aspirin and a bottle of water. I took 2 aspirin to thin my blood, praying it would counteract whatever damage the poison had done. You need to go to the hospital, Sir Mikey said, concern etched on his face. You look pale. Not yet, I said. If I leave now, they win. They will say I wandered off. They will spin the narrative. They will say I am confused, lost. Number 1. I have to walk down that aisle. I have to play the part. Play the part? Mikey asked. They expect a senile old man, I said, looking at my reflection in the car window. I smoothed my silver hair. I adjusted my cuffs. I forced a vacant, slightly confused expression onto my face. I slumped my shoulders just a fraction. They want a victim, I told Mikey. So I will give them a victim, until the moment I drop the guillotine. Mikey smiled. It was a grim, wolfish smile. What do you need me to do, boss? Go into the house, I said. Find the sound system. Patricia said Blake disconnected my microphone for the speeches. I need you to make sure that when I speak, the whole world hears it. and hook up that recorder to the main video feed. Consider it done, Mikey said. I took a deep breath. The air in the garage smelled of oil and betrayal. I walked towards the door leading into the kitchen. My legs felt heavy, but my resolve was iron. I was about to walk into a nest of vipers. I was about to smile at the woman who poisoned me, hug the daughter who sold me out, and shake the hand of the man who wanted to bury me. I opened the door and stepped into the light. The kitchen was bustling with caterers. Patricia was there yelling at a server about the arrangement of the hors d'oeuvres. When she saw me, her face shifted instantly from anger to a sickly sweet concern. "Henry, darling," she cooed, rushing over to me. "Where have you been? We were so worried. You look terrible. Are you feeling okay?" I looked at her. I looked at the eyes I had fallen in love with, the mouth I had kissed this morning. I saw the monster underneath the makeup. I let my hands tremble. I let my jaw go slack. I don't know. I stammered, making my voice sound weak and reedy. I got lost. I was looking for the bathroom. Patricia grabbed my arm, her grip tight and controlling. She turned to the caterers, rolling her eyes. "See what I have to deal with," she whispered loudly enough for them to hear. "He is getting worse every day." She led me out of the kitchen towards the dressing room. "Come on, Henry. Let's get you some water. You need to take your medicine before the ceremony starts." I stumbled along with her, leaning my weight on her shoulder. I could feel her stiffen with revulsion. She hated me. She truly hated me, and the feeling was entirely mutual. As we walked down the hallway lined with portraits of our happy family life, I made a silent vow to my dead wife. I would burn this house to the ground. I would strip them of every dollar, every credit card, every ounce of social standing. By the time the sun went down today, the Dalton name would be cleansed. "I am not a victim," I thought, as she pushed me into a chair and handed me a glass of water spiked with sedatives. "I am the retribution, and the show is just beginning." I took the glass, brought it to my lips, and pretended to drink, letting the liquid flow into the handkerchief I had concealed in my palm. "That's a good boy," Patricia said, patting my cheek. "Just relax, Henry. It will all be over soon." She had no idea how right she was. It would all be over soon. But not for me. For them. I sat back, closed my eyes, and waited for the curtain to rise. I walked down the hallway toward the master suite, my legs feeling heavy not from age, but from the sheer weight of the performance I was about to give. The house was buzzing, with the distant noise of the string quartet warming up in the garden, a sound that usually brought me peace, but today sounded like a funeral dirge. I paused outside the mahogany double doors of my dressing room. My hands were shaking, and for the first time in 40 years of boardroom battles and hostile takeovers, I had to force them to tremble. I needed to look weak. I needed to look like the man they wanted to erase. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and floor wax, and pushed the door open. Patricia was there, standing by the window, adjusting the curtains with a frantic energy that betrayed her composure. She turned as I entered, her face arranging itself instantly into a mask of worried affection. It was terrifying to watch. 1 second, she was a predator, calculating her kill, and the next, she was the doting wife of a fragile old man. She wore a silk dressing gown that I had bought her in Paris last spring, a trip where she had held my hand under the Eiffel Tower and told me I was the love of her life. Now I knew she had likely been texting Blake's father the entire time we were eating croissants on the Seine. "Henry," she exhaled, rushing across the room. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor, a sharp staccato rhythm that hammered against my temples. "Thank God. I was about to send security to look for you. You have been gone for 20 minutes. You know Dr. Aris said you shouldn't wander off alone. Your heart, Henry. Think of your heart." I looked at her, letting my jaw hang slightly loose, my eyes unfocused. I focused on a spot just past her ear, refusing to make direct eye contact. I had to sell the confusion. I had to make her believe the non-existent dementia was taking hold. I couldn't find the library, I mumbled, my voice cracking. I wanted to see the book, the one about the ships. Patricia sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience that grated on my nerves. The library is on the first floor, Henry. We are on the second floor. We have lived here for 15 years. You know this. She took my arm, her grip firm, almost pinching. She led me to the velvet armchair in the corner of the room, treating me like a piece of mismanaged luggage. Sit down, she commanded, though her tone was wrapped in fake sweetness. You are flushed. You are working yourself up again. I need you to stay calm for Victoria. It is her big day. I sank into the chair, letting my body slump. I watched her through half-closed lids as she walked to the side table. There it was, a crystal pitcher of freshly squeezed orange juice and a single glass. The condensation on the glass caught the morning light, making it look inviting, refreshing. But I knew better. I knew that glass contained a cocktail of benzodiazepine strong enough to knock out a horse, or at least make a 69-year-old man slur his words and stumble on his daughter's wedding dress. Here, she said, turning back to me with the glass in her hand. Her smile was tight, her eyes not smiling at all. Drink this. It will help your blood sugar. You look pale. I looked at the glass. In my mind, I was calculating the chemical composition, the time it would take to absorb the legal ramifications of poisoning a spouse. But on the outside, I reached for it with a trembling hand. I made the glass rattle against the saucer. I made myself look pathetic. I don't want it. I whined, pushing the glass away slightly like a petulant child. It's too sour. Henry, drink the juice, she said, her voice dropping an octave. The sweetness evaporated. This was the real Patricia. Impatient, cruel. Don't make a scene. Victoria is already stressed enough without you acting up. Drink it, now. I took the glass. The crystal was cold against my fingertips. I lifted it to my lips, my hand shaking so much that the liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim. I could smell the faint chemical tang underneath the citrus. She was watching me like a hawk, her body tense, waiting for me to swallow the poison that would sign away my freedom. I tilted the glass back. The liquid touched my lips. I let a small amount flow into my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I held the liquid under my tongue, the bitter taste of the sedative blooming in my mouth, vile and metallic. I lowered the glass, feigning a swallow, and then immediately brought my hand up to my mouth to cough. It went down wrong. I sputtered, hacking loudly. I grabbed the silk handkerchief from my breast pocket, the vintage Hermes square I had selected so carefully this morning, and pressed it to my mouth. As I coughed and gagged, I spat the mouthful of poisoned juice into the fabric, folding it quickly to hide the stain. To Patricia, it just looked like an old man choking on his drink. Be careful, she snapped, stepping back to avoid any splatter on her gown. Good Lord, Henry, you can't even drink juice like a normal person anymore. I continued to cough, my eyes watering. I needed to get rid of the rest of the juice in the glass without drinking it. I couldn't just put it down. She would make me finish it. I had to destroy the evidence of my refusal. I let my spasms of coughing turn into a full-body tremor. My arm jerked and I released my grip on the crystal glass. It fell from my hand, tumbling in slow motion towards the expensive Persian rug. The sound of shattering crystal was explosive in the quiet room. Orange juice and shards of glass exploded outward, soaking the rug and splattering onto the hem of my tuxedo pants. No, Patricia shrieked. She stared at the mess, her face turning a shade of red that matched the veins in her neck. The mask was gone completely now. She wasn't the concerned wife. She wasn't even the impatient caretaker. She was a woman whose timeline had just been disrupted, whose perfect plan was being stained by sticky orange pulp. You clumsy old fool, she yelled. The slap came out of nowhere. It wasn't a hard slap, not enough to bruise, but it was sharp, stinging, and utterly humiliating. Her palm connected with my cheek with a wet smack. My head snapped to the side more from shock than force. I sat there frozen, feeling the heat rise in my cheek. I am Henry Dalton. I have dined with presidents. I have built skyscrapers. And here I was, being slapped in my own home by a woman who used to be a waitress before I saved her from bankruptcy. The rage inside me roared like a blast furnace, hot and consuming. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to grab her wrist and twist it until she screamed. I wanted to tell her that I knew everything, that her life as she knew it was over. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I slowly raised a hand to my cheek, my eyes wide with feigned fear. I let my lip tremble. I made myself small. I'm sorry, Patty, I whispered, using the nickname she hated. It slipped. My hand, it just slipped. Look at this mess, she hissed, ignoring my apology. She grabbed a towel from the vanity and threw it at me. Clean yourself up. Look at your pants. You look like a toddler who wet himself. God, I can't wait until tonight is over. She knelt down not to check if I was cut by the glass, but to blot the juice from the rug. She was muttering to herself words that were meant to be private, but were loud enough for me to hear. Useless. Completely useless. Just a few more hours. Just get him to the car. She stood up, holding the juice-soaked towel. She looked at me with pure disgust. There was no love in her eyes. There wasn't even pity. There was only calculation. She saw me as an obstacle, a piece of debris she had to step over to get to the bank vault. Stop crying, she ordered, though I wasn't crying. I was staring at her, memorizing this moment. I was etching the feeling of her hand on my face into my memory, so that later when the police were dragging her away, I wouldn't feel a shred of guilt. I am going to get another glass, she said, smoothing her hair. And you are going to drink it. And if you spill it again, Henry, I swear to God I will pour it down your throat myself. Do you understand me? I nodded, staring at my shoes. Yes, I whispered. Stay here. Don't move. Don't touch anything. She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The lock clicked. She had locked me in. I sat in the silence, the smell of oranges and ammonia rising from the floor. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the juice-soaked handkerchief. I unfolded it, looking at the stain. I folded it back up carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket, right next to the digital recorder. This wasn't just a handkerchief anymore. It was evidence. Attempted poisoning. Elder abuse. I touched my cheek. It still stung. Good. Let it sting. Let it burn. I wanted to remember this pain. I stood up, stepping over the broken glass. I walked to the full-length mirror and looked at myself. I saw an old man with gray hair and a stained suit. But in the eyes staring back at me, I saw a shark smelling blood in the water. You want a helpless old man, Patricia, I whispered to the empty room. You want a child. Fine. I will be the child. But you seem to have forgotten the most important rule of raising children. Eventually they grow up. And when they do, they remember everything. I checked my watch. We had 40 minutes until the ceremony. 40 minutes to keep up this charade. 40 minutes until I could drop the bomb that would blow their entire world apart. I sat back down in the chair, composed my face into a mask of vacancy, and waited for my wife to return with the second dose of my execution. I was ready. The limousine door closed with a heavy final thud that felt less like the start of a celebration and more like the ceiling of a vault. The interior was cool, almost freezing, pumping artificial air that smelled of conditioned leather and the overpowering scent of Victoria's Chanel perfume. It was the same perfume I had bought her for Christmas, a scent that used to remind me of my little girl playing dress-up. Now in the confined space of the stretched Lincoln, It smelled chemical and suffocating. I pressed my back against the plush seat, letting my head loll to the side against the cool window. I watched the familiar oak trees of our driveway blur past trees I had planted with my own hands 30 years ago. I wondered if this would be the last time I saw them as a free man. Victoria sat across from me, her white wedding dress taking up almost the entire bench seat. Tulle and silk cascaded around her like foam from the sea. She looked breathtaking. That was the tragedy of it. She looked exactly like her mother did on our wedding day. The same dark eyes, the same curve of the chin. But where her mother had eyes that held the warmth of the sun, Victoria's eyes were cold, glued to the glowing screen of her smartphone. Her thumbs moved across the glass with a frantic, aggressive rhythm, tapping out messages that I knew weren't about flower arrangements or seating charts. I decided to try one last time. Call it a father's foolish hope. Call it the desperate need to find a shred of humanity left in the child I had raised. I needed to know if the girl who used to cry when she found a wounded bird was truly gone, replaced entirely by this ice queen sitting across from me. I let out a low, shaky breath, making sure it sounded like a wheeze. "Victoria," I rasped, letting my hand tremble as I reached out toward her. I didn't touch her. I didn't want to risk her recoiling from me. I just let my hand hover in the air between us, a bridge she could choose to cross or burn. She didn't look up. She didn't even pause her typing. "What is it, Dad?" she said, her voice flat and distracted. "Do you remember I started keeping my voice soft and wavering? Do you remember the red bicycle? The one with the streamers on the handlebars? You were 6, you were so afraid to take the training wheels off." I waited. I watched her face for a flicker of a smile, a soft softening of the jaw, anything. I remembered that day vividly. I had run behind her for an hour, holding the seat, my back aching, promising I wouldn't let go until she was ready. When I finally let go, and she realized she was flying on her own, the look of triumph on her face had been worth every drop of sweat. I wanted her to remember that trust. Victoria finally looked up, but there was no nostalgia in her expression. There was only irritation. She looked at me like I was a television set that had suddenly turned on to a channel she didn't want to watch. "Dad, honestly," she sighed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling of the limo. "Why are you bringing that up now? I am trying to coordinate with the wedding planner. The florists are running late. I don't have time for your ancient history." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and this time it wasn't the ghost of the poison. It was the heartbreak of rejection. I pushed through it. I had to be sure. I just wanted to say I continued, forcing a tear to pool in the corner of my eye. "I kept my promise, Vicky. I never let go until you were ready. I always tried to catch you." She laughed then. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Well, you can't catch me now, Dad. I am grown up, and frankly right now you are the one who needs catching. Look at you. You are a mess. You have orange juice on your shirt. You are rambling about bicycles. You can barely hold your head up." She leaned forward, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume became overwhelming. Her eyes bored into mine, searching for signs of weakness, verifying that the drugs were working. "This is exactly why we need to sign those papers today, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are slipping. We all see it. Blake sees it. Patricia sees it. You are not capable of managing the estate anymore. You are getting confused. You are living in the past." I am not confused. I wanted to scream. I am sharper than you and your con-man fiancé combined. But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. I blinked slowly, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "Papers," I mumbled, feigning ignorance. "What papers?" "The power of attorney, Dad," she said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if I were deaf or stupid. "And the conservatorship agreement. We talked about this. Blake is going to take care of the business. I am going to take care of the house. You just need to rest. You need to go somewhere where there are professionals who can help you with your episodes. She meant the asylum. She meant locking me away in a room with white walls while she spent my money on yachts and designer handbags. She framed my imprisonment as an act of mercy. It was the ultimate gaslighting. I looked down at her hands. She was holding her phone again. A message popped up on the screen. The font was large, and from my angle I could read it clearly. It was from Blake. Text on screen read, "Is the old bag out of it yet? And make sure he stays awake enough to sign, then we dump him." My heart hammered against my ribs. The old bag. That was me. The man who paid for the phone she was holding. The man who paid for the dress she was wearing. The man who had sat by her bedside for 3 nights straight when she had pneumonia. Victoria smiled as she read the text. It was a small, secret smile, a smile of complicity. She typed back quickly. Text on screen read, "He is fading fast. Talking nonsense about my childhood bike. It is pathetic. I will have the pen ready at the reception." I looked away, staring out the window again. The world outside was bright and sunny, completely at odds with the darkness inside the car. The final nail had been driven into the coffin of my fatherhood. There was no saving her. There was no misunderstanding. She wasn't being manipulated by Blake. She was his equal partner. She was mocking my memories while plotting my demise. I felt a cold resolve settle over me, replacing the pain. If she wanted to treat me like a child, I would play the child. But children can be destructive. Children can break things. And I was going to break everything. I just want you to be happy, princess, I whispered, using the nickname I hadn't used in 10 years. She didn't even look up from her phone. I am happy, Dad. Or I will be as soon as this day is over and we can get everything settled. Just do as you are told today, okay? Don't embarrass me. Don't try to give a speech. Just sit there, smile, and sign where Blake tells you to sign. I nodded weakly. Okay, I said. I will sign. Good, she said, finally putting the phone down. She smoothed the silk of her dress, checking for wrinkles, more concerned with the fabric than with her father's deteriorating condition. The limo began to slow down. We were approaching the church. I could see the steeple rising above the trees, a symbol of sanctuary that today felt like a stage for a grotesque play. I saw the crowd of paparazzi gathering at the gates, no doubt tipped off by Blake to capture the touching moment of the senile tycoon being helped by his devoted daughter. Mikey's voice came over the intercom, sounding professional and distant. "We have arrived, Miss Dalton." Victoria took a deep breath, adjusting her veil. She turned to me, her face shifting instantly. The cruel smirk vanished, replaced by a look of radiant, loving concern. It was a transformation so seamless, it was sociopathic. "Ready, Daddy?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. I looked at her one last time. I looked at the stranger wearing my daughter's face. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the digital recorder, ensuring it was still recording. "Yes," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of its old strength, though she didn't notice. "I am ready." The door opened. The flashbulbs erupted like lightning. The noise of the crowd washed over us. Victoria grabbed my arm, gripping it tight enough to leave bruises, pulling me out into the blinding light. "Smile, Dad," she hissed through her teeth while waving to the cameras. "Remember, you are happy." I stepped out onto the red carpet, my legs wobbling. I squinted against the glare. I let her drag me toward the church doors. I was walking to my own execution, or so they thought. But as I looked at the sea of faces, at the cameras, at the looming structure of the church, I knew the truth. I wasn't the prisoner. I was the warden. And lockup was about to begin. I took a stumbling step, leaning heavily on her, and whispered almost inaudibly, "Let's get this over with." We walked into the shadow of the church entrance, leaving the sunlight behind. The trap was set. The players were in position, and I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The anteroom of the church was supposed to be a place of quiet reflection, a sanctuary where families gathered to share a moment of intimacy before the public spectacle began. But as Victoria dragged me through the heavy oak doors, the air didn't smell like incense or beeswax. It smelled of cheap cologne and desperation. I was shoved into a corner near a faux marble pillar, my legs still trembling from the performance I was maintaining. I leaned against the cold stone, catching my breath, and lifted my head to scan the room. I was looking for a friendly face. I was looking for George, my vice president of operations, who had been my best friend for 30 years. I was looking for Martha, my late wife's sister, who had practically raised Victoria after her mother died. I was looking for the people who actually mattered. They weren't there. Not a single one of them. Instead, the room was filled with strangers. There were about 20 people milling around, sipping champagne that they hadn't paid for, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I watched a young man in a shiny, ill-fitting suit check his reflection in a silver tray. I saw a woman with too much filler in her lips stuffing hors d'oeuvres into her purse. These weren't guests. They were filler. They were the entourage of the new life Blake and Victoria were building, a life of flash over substance, of quantity over quality. I realized with a sinking feeling that my friends hadn't just been uninvited. They had likely been told I didn't want them there. I could imagine the lies Patricia had spun. Henry is not well. He doesn't want anyone to see him like this. He gets violent. It is better to remember him as he was. They had isolated me completely, stripping away my support system so that when the hammer fell, there would be no one left to object. "Stay here, old man," Blake said, appearing at my elbow. He didn't call me Henry. He didn't call me Dad. The mask was slipping more and more the closer we got to the altar. "I need to go handle the press. Don't wander off, or I will have security leash you to a radiator." He walked away, high-fiving the man in the shiny suit. I watched him go, a ball of cold fury forming in my gut. I needed a moment. I needed to check the recorder. I needed to make sure the red light was still blinking, promising me that every insult was being captured for the jury. I shuffled towards the men's restroom, keeping my head down, playing the part of the confused geriatric. I pushed the door open. It was empty, thankfully. The bathroom was opulent, lined with black marble and gold fixtures, a testament to the vanity of the venue. I walked to the sink and gripped the porcelain tightly, staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes were clear. My jaw was set. I looked like a man ready for war. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder. The light was steady. It had captured the conversation in the limo. It had captured the conversation in the garage. But I needed one more thing. I needed a direct threat. I needed Blake to hang himself with his own words, explicitly and undeniably. The door behind me opened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy scent of expensive musk oil filled the small space instantly. I quickly shoved the recorder back into my pocket, leaving the top slightly exposed to ensure the microphone wasn't muffled. I slumped my shoulders, splashing water on my face to hide the alertness in my eyes. "Blake," I mumbled, turning around slowly, water dripping from my chin onto my already stained shirt. I can't find the towels." Blake didn't answer immediately. He turned the lock on the bathroom door with a loud, deliberate click. He leaned back against the door, crossing his arms, looking at me with a mixture of amusement and contempt. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying seeing the great Henry Dalton reduced to a dripping, stammering mess. "You are really selling it, aren't you, Henry?" he said, pushing off the door and walking toward me. His footsteps echoed on the tile. "But between you and me, I think you are just pathetic. You know, when I first met Victoria, I was intimidated by you. The Lion of Logistics. That is what Fortune magazine called you." He stopped, inches from me, invading my personal space. He was taller than me, younger, stronger. He used his height to tower over me, a physical intimidation tactic I had seen 1,000 times in union negotiations. "Now look at you," he sneered. "You are just a scared little rabbit." He reached out and grabbed the lapels of my tuxedo. He wasn't gentle. He jerked me forward, pulling me off balance, so I had to grab his forearms to steady myself. I don't understand," I whimpered, letting my voice tremble. "Why are you doing this, Blake? I gave you a job. I welcomed you." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You gave me a cubicle, Henry. You gave me a salary that wouldn't cover my bar tab. You thought you could control me. You thought you could control Victoria. But you forgot one thing. We are hungry. And you are just food." He released my lapels and reached for my bow tie. It was slightly crooked from the car ride. "Let me fix this for you," he said softly. "You want to look nice for your final public appearance." He began to adjust the tie, his fingers working the silk with practiced ease. But then he didn't stop. He pulled the ends. He kept pulling. The knot tightened against my Adam's apple. It dug into my windpipe. I gasped, my hands flying up to claw at his wrists. This wasn't acting. He was actually choking me. Not enough to kill, but enough to terrify. Enough to show me who owned me. "Blake." I choked out, my face turning red. "Stop." He leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. "Listen to me, you senile old bat," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "When we walk out there, you are going to smile. You are going to sit in the front row. And when I put the papers in front of you at the reception, you are going to sign them. If you hesitate, if you stutter, if you look at me the wrong way, I will make sure your stay at Shady Pines is a living hell. I will pay the orderlies to forget to feed you. I will make sure you die in your own filth. Do you understand me?" He pulled the tie tighter, one final brutal jerk. My vision spotted with black dots. I couldn't breathe. I looked into his eyes and saw the soulless void of a sociopath. He wasn't doing this for the money anymore. He was doing it because he liked it. I tapped my pocket. Once, twice. A nervous tick, he would think. A signal to the recorder I knew. "I understand," I wheezed. He smiled, satisfied. He released the tie, patting it flat against my neck. I sucked in a lungful of air, coughing, clutching my throat. "Good," he said, stepping back and checking his watch, as if he hadn't just assaulted his father-in-law in a church bathroom. "Now wash your face again. You look like a corpse, and we can't have you looking dead until after the honeymoon, can we?" He turned to the mirror, adjusting his own hair, checking his teeth. He looked perfect. He looked like the ideal groom. He had no idea that he had just confessed to extortion and elder abuse on a digital recording that would be admissible in any court in the country. I stood there gasping, rubbing my bruised neck. I looked at his reflection in the mirror. I saw him wink at himself. The arrogance was blinding. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. I reached for a paper towel, my movements slow and deliberate. I wiped my face. I straightened my jacket. I wasn't just fixing my clothes. I was putting on my armor. Blake unlocked the door. He held it open, mocking me with a bow. "After you, Dad." I walked past him, keeping my head down. But as I passed, I whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Thank you for fixing my tie, Blake." He didn't catch the tone. He didn't hear the steel underneath the rasp. He just chuckled. "Anytime, old man. Anytime." We walked back out into the anteroom. The music had swelled. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests, the actors, were taking their seats. I saw Victoria at the end of the hall, clutching her bouquet. She looked at Blake and he gave her a thumbs up. A signal. He is broken. He is ready. I walked toward my daughter, the pain in my throat a constant reminder of the monster she was marrying. I felt the recorder warm against my chest. I had the weapon. Now all I needed was the stage, and as the heavy doors of the sanctuary began to open, revealing the long aisle that led to the altar, I knew the curtain was rising on the final act of their tragedy and the first act of my freedom. The massive oak doors of the cathedral groaned open, a sound that reverberated through the hollow cavity of my chest. The organ music swelled instantly, a thunderous rendition of the wedding march that felt less like a celebration and more like the soundtrack to an impending collision. I stood at the threshold of the nave, the long red carpet stretching out before me like a vein of fresh blood cutting through the gray stone. Beside me, Victoria adjusted her grip on my arm. It was not the gentle, reassuring hold of a daughter seeking support from her father in her final moments as a single woman. It was a clamp. Her fingers manicured to sharp porcelain points dug into the bicep of my tuxedo jacket, pinching the aging skin underneath. She was steering me, not walking with me. She was the handler, and I was the volatile animal being paraded for the final act of the circus. "Walk," she hissed the word, barely moving her perfectly painted lips. "And don't drag your feet. There are 300 people watching. Try to look like you know where you are." I took the first step. My leg felt heavy, a block of lead weighed down by the performance I was forced to maintain. I let my foot catch slightly on the edge of the carpet, stumbling just a fraction of an inch. Victoria jerked me upright with surprising strength, her smile never wavering, for the sea of faces turned towards us. "Steady, Dad," she said loudly, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my stomach churn. "I have got you." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the pews. I could hear them. "Poor dear. Look at how she cares for him. He looks so frail. It is a tragedy, really." They were eating it up. The narrative had been set so perfectly that even my physical stumbling was being interpreted exactly as Blake and Victoria had intended. I looked out at the guests as we began our slow, agonizing march toward the altar. I recognized almost no one. The first few rows, usually reserved for close family and lifelong friends, were filled with people I had only seen in business magazines or on social media feeds. There were influencers with their phones raised recording stories for their millions of followers. There were mid-level hedge fund managers that Blake was trying to impress. There were clients of the logistics firm whom I had refused to do business with because of their shady practices, now sitting in the front row, grinning like sharks who smelled blood in the water. My own friends, the men and women who had stood by me when I was nearly bankrupt in the 80s, were nowhere to be seen. Patricia had scrubbed the guest list clean of anyone who would look at me and see Henry Dalton, the man. She had only invited those who would see Henry Dalton, the liability. I looked at the floral arrangements lining the aisle. White lilies, hundreds of them. The scent was overpowering, thick and cloying. Lilies. The same flowers we had at my late wife's funeral. I wondered if that was a coincidence or a cruel inside joke. Every step I took brought a fresh wave of that funeral scent, a reminder that the man walking this aisle was supposed to be dead by sundown, at least legally speaking. We were halfway down the aisle now. I could see Blake standing at the altar. He stood with his legs slightly apart, his hands clasped in front of him in a pose of false humility. He was wearing a custom-made tuxedo that likely cost more than my first house. His hair was slicked back, his smile gleaming under the architectural lighting. But his eyes gave him away. He wasn't looking at his bride. He was looking at me. He was watching my feet, my hands, my eyes. He was assessing the asset. He was calculating the time remaining until the transfer of power was complete. He looked at his watch, a quick, subtle flick of the wrist. He was impatient. He wanted the signing, not the ceremony. I felt Victoria's nails dig deeper into my arm. "Smile, Dad," she whispered through her teeth. "Stop staring at Blake like that. You look confused. Look happy." I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It felt like stretching old rubber. I tried to summon the memory of the day she was born. I tried to remember the tiny pink bundle I had held in the hospital room, the overwhelming promise I had made to protect her from the world. I looked at her profile now, the sharp jawline, the cold eyes focused on the camera flashes. I had failed. I hadn't protected her from the world. I had failed to protect her from her own greed. I had given her too much too soon, and it had rotted her from the inside out. The grief that washed over me was real, and for a moment my knees actually buckled. "Whoa there," Victoria said, practically dragging me the last 10 feet. "Nearly there. Just a few more steps, and you can sit down and sleep." We reached the steps of the altar. The music reached a crescendo and then cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in the vast space. We stood there, the three of us, the father, the daughter, and the predator. The officiant, a man with a spray tan and teeth that were too white to be real, smiled down at us from the dais. He wasn't our family priest. He was likely another hire, another actor in this elaborate production. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the microphone system. He looked at Victoria, then at Blake, and finally pityingly at me. "Who presents this woman to be married to this man?" he asked. This was the moment, the tradition, the symbolic transfer of responsibility. Usually the father says "I do," or her mother and "I do." It is a moment of joy, of letting go. I stood there. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I could feel the tension rising in the room. The guests shifted in their seats. The silence became uncomfortable, heavy. I looked at Blake. I looked at Victoria. I took a breath, preparing to speak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, "No one, I give her to no one, I am calling the police," but I remembered Mikey's advice. I remembered the recorder in my pocket. I remembered the long game. I had to be the victim for just 1 more hour. But my throat closed up. My dignity, the last shred of it I was holding on to, refused to let me say the words. I physically could not say "I do." I could not verbally consent to my own destruction. So I just stood there, swaying slightly, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Victoria's hand squeezed my arm so hard I thought the bone might snap. "Say it," she hissed, her voice barely audible. "Say the line, you old fool." I looked at her, eyes wide, feigning a total mental lapse. I stammered. Who is—" I pretended to forget who she was. It was the ultimate dagger, a double-edged sword. It played perfectly into their narrative of dementia, but it also denied them the satisfaction of my blessing. Blake's smile faltered. He saw the guests exchanging worried glances. He saw the narrative of the perfect wedding beginning to crack under the weight of the awkward silence. He couldn't let the scene drag on. He couldn't let people start to wonder if something was wrong with me other than old age. He needed to take control. He stepped down from the altar, breaking protocol. He moved with the aggressive speed of a bouncer when breaking up a bar fight. He didn't look like a groom anymore. He looked like a handler dealing with a difficult animal. "Okay, that is enough," Blake said loudly, his voice booming without the microphone. He reached out and grabbed Victoria's hand, yanking her away from me. I stood alone in the center of the aisle, bereft of support, looking small and lost in my oversized tuxedo. "He is having a bad day, folks," Blake announced to the crowd, flashing a charming, apologetic grin. "The excitement is a bit too much for him." Then he turned to me. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated malice that only I could see. He stepped into my personal space, his chest bumping against mine. "Sit down, Henry," he whispered. I didn't move fast enough. I didn't want to move. I wanted to stand my ground. Blake didn't wait. He placed his hand flat against the center of my chest. To the audience, it might have looked like a gesture of guidance, a gentle push to steer me toward the front pew. But the force behind it was violent. He shoved me, hard. My balance, already compromised by the act I was putting on, failed me. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the thick red carpet. I flailed my arms, windmilling in the air, trying to find purchase on empty space. Dad Victoria cried out, but she didn't move to catch me. She just brought her hands to her mouth in a theatrical gesture of shock. I hit the wooden pew behind me with a sickening thud. The hard oak dug into my spine. I slid down my legs, tangling until I hit the stone floor. My hip bone cracked against the granite. A jolt of white-hot pain shot up my leg, real pain, agonizing pain that made my vision blur. A collective gasp went up from the congregation. Someone screamed. I lay there on the cold floor, looking up at the vaulted ceiling. I saw the faces of the people in the front row peering over the pew, their expressions a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. I saw the flashes of phone cameras going off. They were filming the fallen giant. Blake stood over me, adjusting his cuffs. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't kneel to check if I was injured. He just looked down, his eyes cold and dead. "Get the groomsman," he barked at someone nearby. "Help him up. Get him some water. He is dehydrated." He looked at the crowd, shrugging his shoulders. "The medication," he said loudly. "It makes him dizzy. We told him to use the wheelchair, but he is too stubborn. You know how it is." I lay there, the pain in my hip throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I tasted blood in my mouth where I had bitten my tongue. This was it. This was rock bottom. I was lying on the floor of a church, pushed down by the man stealing my legacy, while my daughter stood by and watched. Two burly groomsmen, fraternity brothers of Blake who looked like they played linebacker for a living, hoisted me up by my armpits. They weren't gentle. They dragged me like a sack of potatoes and dropped me onto the hard wooden bench of the front pew. I slumped against the backrest, breathing heavily. I clutched my chest, playing up the heart condition, but inside my heart was beating with a cold, steady rhythm. I looked at Blake. He was back at the altar, holding Victoria's hand. He was smiling again. He thought he had handled the situation. He thought he had neutralized the threat. He turned his back to me to face the officiant. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the recorder. It was still there. It was still recording. It had heard the shove. It had heard the lack of consent. It had heard the lies about the medication. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. I let my head hang low, chin to my chest, the picture of a defeated, broken man. But under the shelter of my bowed head, my eyes were open. I was watching the back of Blake's neck. I was watching the way Victoria's shoulders relaxed now that I was out of the way. Go ahead, I thought. Say your vows. Make your promises to God. Because when you turn around, you are not going to see a helpless old man. You are going to see the end of your world. I sat in the pew, nursing my bruised hip, and waited for the microphone. I waited for Mikey. I waited for the moment when silence would no longer be an option. The storm wasn't just coming. It was sitting in the front row wearing a tuxedo, and it was ready to break. The transition from the cathedral to the reception hall was a blur of flashing lights and forced smiles. I had been escorted, or rather dragged, to the head table, which was set upon a raised dais overlooking the 300 guests. I sat there nursing a glass of sparkling water, my hip throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache that served as a constant reminder of Blake's shove. The room was magnificent, I had to admit. The vaulted ceilings were draped in white silk, and thousands of orchids cascaded from the chandeliers. It was a display of wealth so excessive it bordered on obscene, especially considering the money used to pay for it was in their minds already theirs. Blake and Victoria sat in the center of the table, holding hands, basking in the adoration of the crowd. They looked like royalty, the king and queen of the con. Blake leaned over to whisper something in Victoria's ear, and she threw her head back, laughing, a sparkling, artificial laugh that didn't reach her eyes. They were celebrating. They thought the hard part was over. The old man had been humiliated, pushed aside, and was now sitting quietly in the corner, medicated and defeated. They were just waiting for the cake cutting to slip the power of attorney documents under my nose. The master of ceremonies, a slick man, with a radio voice, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "please raise your glasses for the maid of honor toast." I watched as Victoria's best friend, a girl named Chloe who had never worked a day in her life, stumbled through a speech about love and destiny. I watched the guests pretend to listen, their eyes glazing over. I watched Patricia sitting 2 seats away from me, texting under the table. She caught me looking and shot me a glare that could peel paint. "Sit up straight, Henry," she mouthed. "You look like a corpse." I slowly straightened my spine, fighting the pain. I didn't look away. I held her gaze until she was the one who flinched and looked back at her phone. The predator senses fear, but it also senses a threat. She was starting to feel the shift in the air, even if she couldn't name it yet. After the best man finished a speech filled with inside jokes that only frat brothers would understand, the room fell into a polite silence. The MC looked at his cue card, hesitated for a split second, and then smiled. And finally, he said, his voice dropping a notch, "We have a few words from the father of the bride, Mr. Henry Dalton." A ripple of tension went through the room. I saw Blake stiffen. He hadn't expected this. He had given strict orders. He stood up halfway, waving his hand at the MC, in a cut-it-out gesture, slashing his finger across his throat. But the spotlight had already swung toward me. The beam was blinding hot and white. I slowly pushed my chair back. The screech of the wooden legs against the parquet floor echoed in the silent room. I used the table to pull myself up, playing the part of the struggling invalid one last time. I stood there swaying slightly, blinking in the light. Blake was staring at me, his eyes wide with warning. He tapped his watch. "Time to go," his eyes said. "Sit down or else." I ignored him. I reached for the microphone stand that had been placed in front of my seat. It was a wireless mic, sleek and modern. I pulled it off the stand. My hand was shaking. I brought it to my lips. "My daughter," I began. Silence. I tapped the microphone head. Thump, thump, nothing. No sound from the speakers. I tried again. "Victoria." Still nothing. The room was dead silent save for the clinking of silverware. Blake stood up fully now, a look of mock sympathy plastered on his face. "Oh, folks," he announced, his voice projecting easily over the crowd. "It looks like we are having some technical difficulties. And honestly, Dad is pretty tired. It has been a long day. Maybe we should let him rest." He walked toward me, reaching out to take the dead microphone from my hand. His grip was hard. "Give it to me, Henry," he whispered. "Don't embarrass yourself. It is turned off. I made sure of it." I held onto the microphone. We were locked in a silent struggle, 2 men holding a piece of plastic, fighting for dominance. The guests watched, confused. To them, it looked like a caring son-in-law helping a confused old man. "Just sit down," Blake hissed. And then a sound tore through the air. It was a high-pitched squeal of feedback, loud enough to make half the room cover their ears. It didn't come from the microphone in my hand. It came from the main speaker stacks towering on either side of the stage. Blake froze. He looked around, confused. From the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains stage, left a figure emerged. It wasn't a waiter. It wasn't the DJ. It was Mikey. He was wearing his old dress blues, the uniform of a United States Marine, impeccably pressed metals gleaming under the stage lights. He looked like a tank made of flesh and bone. He walked across the stage with a stride that shook the floorboards. In his hand, he held a heavy corded microphone, the cable trailing behind him like a snake. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Victoria. He walked straight to me. Blake stepped in his path. "Who the hell? Mikey, get out of here. You are fired." Mikey didn't even slow down. He simply shoulder-checked Blake as he passed. It was a casual movement, but it sent Blake stumbling backward into the wedding cake table. Frosting smeared onto his expensive tuxedo. Mikey stopped in front of me. He looked into my eyes. There was no pity there anymore. There was only respect. He held out the microphone. "Your floor, sir," he said, his voice deep and steady. I dropped the dead wireless mic. It clattered onto the plates, breaking a piece of china. I took the corded microphone from Mikey. It felt heavy. It felt cold. It felt like a weapon. I wrapped my fingers around it. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in 12 hours, I stood up completely straight. The slump vanished. The tremors ceased. The vacuous look in my eyes sharpened into a glare of pure diamond-hard clarity. I looked at Blake, who was wiping frosting from his sleeve, looking furious. I looked at Victoria, whose mouth was hanging open. I looked at Patricia, who had turned the color of ash. I brought the microphone to my lips. "Can you hear me now?" I asked. My voice boomed through the hall, rich and powerful, rattling the crystal glasses on the tables. It was the voice that had commanded strikes, the voice that had built an empire. It was not the voice of a man with dementia. A gasp went through the room. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. Blake scrambled to his feet. "Cut the sound," he screamed at the DJ booth. "Cut it now!" But the DJ was gone. One of Mikey's Marine buddies was standing in the booth, arms crossed, staring Blake down. "I am not finished," I roared, my voice drowning out Blake's protests. I turned to face the crowd. I made eye contact with the bankers, the lawyers, the fair-weather friends. "You all came here expecting a wedding, hon," I said, pacing slowly in front of the table. "You came to see the union of two young lovers. You came to drink my champagne and eat my food. But mostly, you came to see the final act of Henry Dalton." I pointed a finger at the front row. "I heard the whispers," I said, softly leaning in. "Poor Henry. He is losing it. He is senile. He is pathetic." I laughed. It was a dark, menacing sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Do you think I am crazy?" I asked. I turned to Victoria. She was gripping the tablecloth, her knuckles white. "Victoria, do you think I am crazy?" I repeated. "Dad, stop!" she squeaked, tears of panic welling in her eyes. "You are making a scene. Please. You are sick." "Sick?" I asked. "Am I? Or am I just inconvenient?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief. The orange juice stain had dried to a crusty brown. "This morning my loving wife handed me a glass of juice," I said, holding the cloth up for the cameras. "She told me it was for my blood sugar. But when I didn't drink it, she slapped me." I turned to Patricia. She was shaking her head violently. No, he is lying. He is imagining things." "I didn't drink it, Patricia," I said. "I spat it into this cloth. And do you know what the lab boys are going to find when they test it? They aren't going to find vitamin C. They are going to find benzodiazepine, enough to kill an elephant." The room erupted. Chairs scraped as people stood up. Voices raised in shock. "Sit down," I commanded. And they sat. I turned to Blake. He was backing away, looking for an exit. "And you, Blake," I said. "My financial advisor. The man who fixed my tie in the bathroom." I touched my neck. "You told me that if I didn't sign the papers, you would pay the orderlies at the asylum to let me rot in my own filth," I said. "You threatened to kill me slowly." "That is a lie," Blake screamed, his voice cracking. "He is having an episode. Someone call security. Get this lunatic off the stage." "Security?" I asked. I looked toward the back of the room. The double doors swung open. But it wasn't the hotel security that walked in. It was a phalanx of uniformed police officers led by the chief of police himself. Behind them walked Leonard Katz, clutching a thick black briefcase. "You wanted security, Blake," I said, smiling for the first time. "I brought the whole precinct." Blake looked at the police, then back at me. The arrogance was gone. The smugness had evaporated. In its place was the raw animal terror of a man watching the walls of his prison cell rise up around him. "You see," I said, walking toward him until I was inches from his face, I didn't need to be crazy to see what you were. I just needed to be quiet. I turned back to the microphone one last time. The wedding is over, I announced. The bar is closed, and the groom has a prior engagement. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud that signaled the end of their world. I stood there watching the color drain from my daughter's face and felt absolutely nothing but the cold, clean air of justice. The silence that followed the dropping of the microphone was short-lived. It was shattered by Blake's voice screeching at a pitch that was entirely undignified for a man in a $5,000 tuxedo. He was pointing a trembling finger at the back of the room, his face a mask of sweaty desperation. "Security!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Arrest him! Arrest that man! He is disturbing the peace! He is trespassing!" But the men who marched through the double doors were not the private security guards Blake had hired to keep the riffraff out. They were uniformed officers of the city police department, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers, their hands resting on their holsters. And walking in front of them, looking like an avenging angel in a charcoal gray suit, was Leonard Katz. Leonard did not look like a man attending a wedding. He looked like a man arriving at a crime scene. He carried a thick black briefcase in one hand and a court order in the other. He walked straight down the center aisle, ignoring the gasps of the guests who were now standing on their chairs to get a better view. The chief of police stepped forward, raising a hand to silence the rising murmur of the crowd. "Please remain seated," he announced, his voice booming with authority. "No one is to leave this room. This is now an active investigation." Blake scrambled down from the dais, rushing toward the chief. "Officer." "Thank God you are here," he said, trying to summon his charming con man persona, though his eyes were darting around like a trapped rat. "My father-in-law is having a psychotic break. He is armed with a microphone stand. You need to take him into custody for his own safety." Leonard stepped between Blake and the chief. He looked at Blake with the sort of disdain one usually reserves for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Mr. Anderson Leonard," said his voice calm and icy, "the only person going into custody today is you, and I suggest you save your breath. You are going to need it to explain to a judge why you attempted to defraud a vulnerable senior citizen of a $2 billion estate." "That is slander," Blake spat, though he took a step back. "You have no proof." "Proof I asked from the stage." I walked over to the wedding cake table, careful not to slip on the frosting that was smearing the floor. I picked up a silver cake knife and tapped it against a glass, demanding attention. "You want proof," I said to the room. I looked up at the massive LED screen behind the head table. Until a moment ago, it had been cycling through a slideshow of engagement photos. Victoria and Blake on a yacht. Victoria and Blake in Paris. Victoria and Blake looking like the perfect happy couple. "Mikey," I said into the corded microphone, "play the tape." The screen flickered. The smiling faces of the bride and groom vanished, replaced by a grainy black and white image. It was a time-stamped video feed. The time read 8:14 in the morning. The location was unmistakably my garage. A hush fell over the room. It was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. On the screen, the trunk of the Rolls-Royce popped open. Mikey's face appeared, looking terrified. Then the camera angle shifted as the view switched to the hidden camera Mikey had installed on the visor. The audio crackled to life, booming through the concert-grade speakers of the reception hall. "Did the old man sign the papers yet?" It was Victoria's voice. Clear, impatient, cold. On the screen, Victoria and Blake walked into frame. The guests gasped. They looked from the screen to the real Victoria standing on the stage, her face pale as a sheet. "No, not yet," the recorded, Blake replied. "But don't worry, the sedative Patricia gave him will kick in within the hour. By the time we cut the cake, he won't even know his own name." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. I saw the mother of the groom, a woman who didn't know her son was a criminal, cover her mouth with her hand. I saw the bank managers in the front row pulling out their phones, hitting record. We get the emergency conservatorship sign, the power of attorney, and ship him off to Shady Pines tonight. The recorded, Blake continued laughing. We are looking at $2 billion split 3 ways. I watched Blake. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the floor, his fists clenched. He knew it was over. But Victoria was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "It is fake," she screamed, pointing at the screen. "It is AI. Someone generated that voice. It is a deepfake. My father is doing this to hurt me. He is jealous." I didn't say a word. I just nodded to Mikey. The video cut. The screen went black for a second. Then a new image appeared. This one was in color. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. The location was a dimly lit room. It looked like a motel room. Cheap art on the walls. Unmade bed. 2 figures were sitting on the edge of the bed counting stacks of cash. One was a man I recognized instantly, though I had never met him. He had the same jawline as Blake. It was Blake's father, the forger. And sitting next to him wearing a bathrobe I had bought her was Patricia. The crowd erupted. It was pandemonium. People were shouting. I saw Patricia's sister in the 3rd row stand up and look at her with horror. On the screen, Patricia leaned over and kissed the man. It was a long, passionate kiss. Then she pulled back and laughed. "The old fool has no idea," the recorded Patricia said. "He thinks I am at a charity gala. He is so desperate for love. He believes anything I tell him. God. His skin feels like paper. I have to wash my hands every time I touch him." The man laughed. "Just a little longer, baby. Once Blake gets the signature, we liquidate the assets and meet in the Caymans. You won't ever have to touch him again." "I can't wait," Patricia said on screen, falling back onto the bed. "I am going to buy a younger husband with his money." The video froze on that image. Patricia laughing on a motel bed with another man. I looked at the real Patricia. She was standing near the edge of the stage. She wasn't screaming anymore. She wasn't denying it. She was frozen, staring at her own betrayal projected 20 feet high for 300 of her closest friends and rivals to see. Her face was a mask of absolute terror. She knew that every person in that room, every society wife she had tried to impress, every charity board member she had schmoozed, was seeing her naked soul. And it was ugly. I walked over to her. I stood next to her, looking up at the screen. "You know, Patricia," I said into the microphone, my voice calm but amplified so everyone could hear. "You were right about one thing. My skin does feel like paper. But paper can cut, and paper can burn." Patricia turned to me. Her eyes were wild. "Henry, please," she whispered, grabbing my sleeve. That was a long time ago. We were on a break. It is taken out of context. I love you. You know I love you." I gently peeled her fingers off my sleeve as if she were something contagious. "You don't love me, Patricia," I said. "You love the lifestyle I provide. And as of this morning, that lifestyle has been terminated." I turned to the crowd. The police officers were moving in now. They were surrounding the stage. "Turn it off!" Blake screamed, finally snapping. He grabbed a wine bottle from the table and hurled it at the screen. It shattered harmlessly against the frame glass, raining down on the floor. "That is enough," the chief of police shouted. "Blake Anderson, put your hands behind your head. Now!" Blake looked for an exit. He looked at the kitchen doors. He looked at the fire exit. But every door was blocked by a uniformed officer. I watched as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. The arrogance, the swagger, the plans for the Caymans, it all evaporated in the face of cold, hard justice. Victoria was sitting on the floor now, her beautiful wedding dress pooling around her like a shroud. She was sobbing, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. "Daddy, please," she wailed, looking up at me. Make them stop. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I am your daughter." I looked down at her. I remembered the little girl on the bicycle. I remembered the teenager I taught to drive. I searched my heart for that well of unconditional love that fathers are supposed to have. But all I found was the memory of the trunk, the darkness, the lack of air, the way she had checked her makeup while discussing my imprisonment in a mental ward. "You are not my daughter," I said, my voice breaking slightly, not from weakness but from the finality of the loss. "You are an accomplice." I signaled to the chief. "Officer, do your duty." The officers swarmed the stage. I watched as they grabbed Blake. He struggled, shouting obscenities, kicking at the officers. It took 3 of them to pin him to the ground. I heard the distinct click-click of handcuffs tightening. Then they moved to Patricia. She didn't fight. She went limp, sobbing hysterically as they pulled her arms behind her back. She looked at me one last time, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "Henry." "I am sorry," she wailed. "I am so sorry." "Save it for the jury, Patricia," I said, turning my back on her. "And finally, Victoria." An officer, a female officer, approached her gently. "Ma'am, you need to stand up." "I can't," Victoria sobbed. "I can't go to jail. I have a honeymoon. I have tickets to Italy." "You won't be needing those," Leonard said, stepping onto the stage next to me. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. I looked at the crowd. They were silent now, watching the arrest with a mixture of horror and fascination. Phones were still recording. This was going to be on the news tonight. It was going to be the scandal of the decade. I raised the microphone one last time. "I apologize for the disruption," I said to the guests. "I know the cake hasn't been cut, but I think you will agree that the entertainment was worth the wait." I looked at the waitstaff, who were standing by the walls looking terrified. "Open the champagne," I ordered. "Everyone have a drink. It is on me." "We are celebrating what Henry," someone shouted from the back. I looked at the 3 empty chairs where my family used to sit. I looked at the handcuffs glinting under the stage lights. "We are celebrating a clean house," I said. I handed the microphone to Mikey. He took it, nodding solemnly. "Let's go, sir," Mikey said. "The car is waiting." I walked off the stage, stepping over the broken glass and the spilled frosting. I didn't look back at the sobbing figures being led away in cuffs. I walked down the aisle through the crowd of stunned faces. Leonard walked beside me, closing his briefcase with a satisfying snap. As we reached the double doors, I paused. I looked back at the screen one last time. It had gone black. The show was over. The lights were coming up, and for the first time in years, I could see everything clearly. The rot was gone. The parasites were removed. It was just me, my loyal friend, and the rest of my life. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning units and the soft, terrified weeping of my daughter. The police had paused their extraction of the prisoners, allowing Leonard Katz the floor. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that would hurt Victoria more than any pair of handcuffs ever could. Leonard placed his heavy black briefcase on the table where the wedding cake stood uncut. He clicked the latches open with a sound that echoed like 2 gunshots in the silence. He didn't rush. He was a master of timing, and he knew that the anticipation of the blade was often worse than the cut itself. Victoria was sitting on the steps of the stage, her expensive dress ruined her face, a mess of tears and mascara. She looked up at Leonard, her eyes darting between him and me, searching for a lifeline. She was terrified of jail, yes, but I could see the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. She was thinking that even if Blake went away, even if Patricia was disgraced, she was still a Dalton. She was still the heiress. She still had the name, and she thought she still had the money. Leonard pulled a single crisp document from the briefcase. He held it up to the light. It wasn't a thick contract. It was a single sheet of paper, dense with legal text signed at the bottoms with my signature in bold, unwavering ink. Victoria Leonard began, his voice calm, professional, and utterly devoid of sympathy. You seem to be laboring under a significant delusion regarding your financial standing. You believe that because you are Henry's biological daughter, you are entitled to his empire. You believe that the trust fund you have lived off of for 10 years is a right, not a privilege. Victoria sniffed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. It is my money, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. It is family money. The courts won't let you cut me off just because of a misunderstanding. I have rights. I have the penthouse. I have the Hamptons estate. Those are in my name. Leonard smiled. It was a shark's smile. Actually, they are not. They were held in a revocable living trust of which you were the beneficiary. Key word being revocable. He walked over to her, his shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. He loomed over her, blocking out the stage lights. This morning at 8:30, while you were busy plotting to have your father declared mentally incompetent, Henry executed a document known as the Phoenix Protocol. Victoria blinked. The what? She whispered. The Phoenix Protocol. Leonard repeated, savoring the words. It is a fail-safe mechanism designed for exactly this scenario. You see, Henry knew there was a risk. He knew that if he was incapacitated, or if he was placed under a conservatorship under suspicious circumstances, his assets would be vulnerable. So he created a trigger. Leonard turned to the crowd, addressing the 300 witnesses. This document states that the moment any family member attempts to legally challenge Henry Dalton's mental capacity, or attempts to utilize a power of attorney obtained under duress, a transfer is automatically initiated. It does not require a judge. It does not require a waiting period. It is immediate. He turned back to Victoria, dropping the paper onto her lap. At the exact moment Blake tried to have the police detain Henry for being crazy, the condition was met. The trap was sprung. Victoria picked up the paper, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. She tried to read it, but her eyes were swimming with tears. What does it mean? She choked out. What does it say? It says, Leonard replied, leaning in close, that the entirety of the Dalton estate, including Dalton Logistics, the real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, and yes, your personal trust fund has been transferred into an irrevocable blind trust. And who is the beneficiary? Victoria asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Is it me? Is it a trustee? Leonard laughed. A dry, humorless sound. No, Victoria. It is not you. The sole beneficiary of the blind trust is the National Veterans Support Foundation. I watched the color drain from Victoria's face. It didn't just fade. It vanished, leaving her looking like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The veterans, she whispered. Every penny, Leonard confirmed. $2.4 billion. It is gone, Victoria. It is no longer Henry's money. It is no longer family money. It belongs to the men and women who served this country. It is already done. The electronic transfer was confirmed 5 minutes ago. Victoria scrambled to her feet, clutching the paper. You can't do that, she screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. You can't just give away $2 billion. That is my inheritance. That is my life. I have bills. I have the wedding to pay for. I have the mortgage on the condo. You have nothing. Leonard said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You don't seem to understand the gravity of the word nothing. Let me itemize it for you. The credit cards in your purse canceled. The lease on your Range Rover terminated. The penthouse. The locks are being changed as we speak. The jewelry you are wearing. Unless you have a receipt proving you paid for it with your own earnings, it is considered property of the estate which now belongs to the charity. Victoria looked down at the diamond necklace around her neck. She clawed at it as if it were suddenly burning her skin. "No," she wailed. "No, no, no. You are lying. Daddy, tell him he is lying." She turned to me, falling to her knees at the edge of the stage. She crawled toward me, ignoring the glass and the frosting. She looked up at me with eyes that were black holes of desperation. "Daddy, please," she begged, grabbing the hem of my trousers. "You can't let me be poor. I don't know how to be poor. I can't work. I have never worked. Please. I am your princess. You promised. You promised you would always take care of me." I looked down at her. I saw the creature I had created. I had watered this weed with money for 28 years, and I was surprised when it choked the garden. I felt a pang of old guilt, the ghost of the father I used to be. But then I remembered the text message, the old bag. I remembered the trunk. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp. "I did promise to take care of you," I said, my voice steady. "And I did. I gave you the best education money could buy. I gave you connections. I gave you a debt-free start in life that 99% of the world would kill for. You had every opportunity to build something of your own. Instead, you decided to cannibalize me. But $2 billion, she sobbed. You gave it all to strangers." "They are not strangers," I said, looking at Mikey, who was standing guard by the stairs. "They are people who understand the meaning of duty. They are people who would never shove their fathers into a trunk." Victoria collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position. She was wailing now, a raw animal sound of total loss. It wasn't the loss of a parent she was mourning. It was the loss of her future. She was grieving the yachts she would never sail, the galas she would never attend, the power she would never wield. Leonard wasn't finished. He had one more nail for the coffin. And regarding the wedding, Leonard added, looking around the lavishly decorated room, "Since the contracts were signed by you, Victoria, and the credit card on file has been declined as of 4 minutes ago, the venue manager informs me that you are personally liable for the outstanding balance. That is roughly $150,000. I suggest you start looking for a job. I hear the prison laundry pays 12 cents an hour." The brutality of the statement hung in the air. The guests were silent, staring at the ruin of a dynasty. They were witnessing a financial execution. Victoria Dalton, the golden girl of New York society, had been reduced to a destitute criminal in the span of an hour. Blake, who was still being held by the police, started shouting, "You crazy old man! You can't do this! We will sue! We will contest the trust!" "With what money?" Leonard shot back. "You don't have a retainer. You don't have a lawyer. You don't even have bail money. You are going to go to a public defender, and when they see the video evidence, they are going to tell you to plead guilty and pray for mercy." The chief of police signaled his men, "Get them out of here." I watched as they hauled Victoria up. She was limp, dead weight. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was catatonic. The reality of the numbers had broken her mind in a way the handcuffs hadn't. $2 billion. Gone. The scale of the loss was too massive for her to comprehend. She stared at me as she was dragged away, her eyes empty, seeing a world that was suddenly gray and terrifying. I stood there on the stage, listening to the fading sirens. I looked at the empty room, the half-eaten food, the shattered glass. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mikey. "It is done," Sir Mikey said softly. "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath. "It is done." I looked at Leonard. "Thank you, old friend." Leonard nodded, snapping his briefcase shut. "It was a pleasure, Henry. Expensive, but a pleasure." I turned to leave, but before I did, I looked at the LED screen one last time. It was dark now. The evidence was gone, but the truth remained. I had lost a fortune today. I had lost my family. But as I walked toward the exit, my step was lighter than it had been in years. I realized that the $2 billion hadn't been my wealth. It had been my cage. and I had just bought the most expensive key in history to unlock it. I was broke, relatively speaking. I was alone, and I was free. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the chest of every person in the room. The financial execution was over, and now the criminal execution was beginning. The chief of police stepped forward, his boots crunching on the sugar and glass that littered the stage. He didn't look like a wedding guest. He looked like a hammer waiting to strike a nail. He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket, the parchment crinkling in the quiet room. It was an arrest warrant signed by a judge who had seen the video evidence just an hour ago. Blake Anderson, the chief, announced, his voice projecting without the need for a microphone. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, elder abuse, attempted grand larceny, and wire fraud." Blake, who had been pinned to the floor by two officers, let out a howl of rage. He twisted his body, trying to buck the officers off him, his face purple with exertion. "Get off me!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You have no right. I am a citizen. I know my rights. This is entrapment. That old man set me up." The officers didn't argue. They didn't debate the finer points of the law with a man who had just tried to steal $2 billion. One of the officers, a burly sergeant with a face carved from granite, simply pressed his knee harder into the small of Blake's back. He grabbed Blake's right arm and wrenched it behind him. The sound of the shoulder joint popping was audible in the front row. Blake shrieked in pain, his bravado evaporating instantly. "You are hurting me," Blake whined, his face pressed against the frosting-smeared floor. "That is the point of resisting arrest, son," the sergeant muttered. "Stop moving." I watched as the sergeant pulled the handcuffs from his belt. They were standard-issue steel, dull and heavy. They weren't jewelry. They were tools of restraint. The sergeant slapped the first cuff onto Blake's wrist with a metallic click that sounded like a prison door slamming shut. He yanked Blake's other arm back and secured the second cuff. Blake Anderson, the sergeant recited, hauling Blake to his feet by the chain of the handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Blake stood there, swaying, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder, his hair wild. He looked at me. His eyes were no longer arrogant. They were feral, filled with the panic of a trapped animal. "Henry, tell them," he pleaded, switching tactics in a heartbeat. "Tell them it was a joke. We were worried about you. We wanted to make sure you were safe. It was all for you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tightened my tie in the bathroom until I couldn't breathe. I took a sip of my champagne, the bubbles cold and sharp on my tongue. "You have the right to remain silent, Blake," I said calmly. "I suggest you use it." The officers shoved him toward the stairs. He stumbled, nearly falling, his dignity completely stripped away. The guests parted like the Red Sea as he was marched down the aisle, cameras flashing, capturing his disgrace for the morning papers. Next came Patricia. She hadn't moved since the video ended. She stood near the microphone stand, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering, as if the temperature in the room had dropped 50 degrees. When the female officer approached her, Patricia didn't run. She turned slowly to face me. The fear in her eyes had hardened into something else. Something ugly and ancient. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized that pleading wouldn't work. She realized that the soft, doting wife act was over. She dropped the mask completely. "You bastard," she hissed, the venom in her voice making the officer pause. "You senile, vindictive old bastard." "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer ordered, reaching for her wrists. Patricia slapped the officer's wang away. "Don't touch me," she shrieked. "Do you know how much this dress costs?" The officer didn't blink. She spun Patricia around with practiced efficiency, forcing her wrists together. Patricia struggled, kicking out with her heels, her face contorted into a rictus of rage. "I hope you die alone, Henry," Patricia screamed as the cuffs locked onto her wrists. I hope your heart stops tonight. I hope you rot in that big empty house. You are nothing but a walking checkbook. I never loved you. I was repulsed by you. Every time you touched me, I wanted to vomit. The crowd gasped. It was a shocking, visceral display of malice. But I didn't flinch. I didn't feel hurt. In fact, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, she was telling the truth. I walked over to her, stopping just out of spitting range. "You are wrong, Patricia," I said softly, only loud enough for her and the front row to hear. "I won't die alone. I have more friends in this room than you ever will. Because you bought people, Patricia. I built them." "Get her out of my sight," I told the officer. Patricia was screaming obscenities as they dragged her away, her heels scraping lines into the polished floor. She looked like a demon being exorcised, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure evil. And then there was only one left. Victoria. She was still on the floor, curled in a ball amidst the ruins of her wedding dress. She wasn't screaming like Patricia. She wasn't fighting like Blake. She was weeping a low, keening sound of utter despair. When the chief of police approached her, she didn't look at him. She looked at me. She scrambled to her knees, clasping her hands together in a gesture of prayer. She looked so young, so small. For a split second, my heart lurched. This was my baby. This was the girl I had carried on my shoulders. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, her voice raw. "Not the cuffs. Please, not the cuffs. Everyone is watching." "Stand up," Victoria, the chief, said gently but firmly. She ignored him. She shuffled forward on her knees, reaching for me. Her hands were stained with cake and tears. "Daddy, I am sorry," she begged. "I was scared. Blake made me do it. He told me you were sick. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. I am your little girl. You can't let them take me to jail. I won't survive in there." She grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. Her tears were hot on my skin. "Just tell them to stop," she whispered. "You have the power. You can stop this. We can go home. I will take care of you, I promise. I will be the best daughter. Just don't let them take me." I looked down at her. I looked at the tears. I looked at the trembling lips. And then I remembered the garage. I remembered the cold darkness of the trunk. I remembered her voice, clear and cold, asking if I had signed the papers yet. I remembered her planning to lock me away in a mental institution until I died. I realized then that the daughter I loved didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. The woman kneeling before me was a stranger who shared my DNA and nothing else. She was a criminal who had gambled her soul for a bank account and lost. I slowly, deliberately pulled my hand from her grip. I took a step back, putting distance between us. "You are not a child, Victoria," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "You are 28 years old. You made a choice. You chose money over your father. You chose a con man over your family." "But I am sorry," she wailed, reaching out again, grasping at empty air. "Sorry doesn't open the trunk, Victoria," I said. "Sorry doesn't unsigned the commitment papers you prepared. Sorry doesn't give me back the trust I had in you." I looked at the chief. "She is all yours, Chief." "No," Victoria screamed as the officer pulled her to her feet. "Daddy, no, don't do this. I am your flesh and blood." The officer pulled her arms behind her back. Victoria fought then. She thrashed her veil, tearing her dress, ripping at the seams. It was a pathetic, ugly struggle. The sound of the handcuffs clicking on her wrists was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a door closing forever. I stood there watching as they led her away. She was looking back at me over her shoulder, her eyes wide with betrayal, as if I were the one who had wronged her. "You did this," she screamed at me as they pushed her toward the exit. "You ruined my life." I didn't say anything. I just watched until the white of her dress disappeared through the double doors, followed by the blue uniforms of the police. The room was silent. The guests were staring at me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for the grieving father to collapse. But I didn't collapse. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The cancer was cut out. The surgery was brutal, yes. There was blood on the floor. But the patient was going to live. I turned to Leonard, who was watching me with a look of quiet respect. "Leonard," I said, my voice steady, "make sure the police have the original recordings, and tell the press that any further questions can be directed to my legal counsel." I looked at Mikey. "Let's go get that burger, Mikey. I am starving." Mikey grinned, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Yes, sir, boss." "Double cheese and bacon." "Double cheese and bacon." I agreed. I walked down the steps of the stage, my head held high. I didn't look at the empty chairs where my family had sat. I didn't look at the shocked faces of the elite. I walked out of the ballroom, past the police cars with their flashing lights, and into the night. The air was cold, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't shivering. I was warm. I was alive. And most importantly, I was right. The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce Phantom closed with a solid, reassuring thud, sealing out the noise of the sirens and the chaotic flash of paparazzi cameras. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of silence, smelling of aged leather and the faint, lingering scent of the cedar polish Mikey used on the dashboard. I sank back into the seat, the adrenaline that had sustained me for the last 12 hours finally beginning to ebb away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the exhaustion of a soldier who has survived the battle and knows the war is finally over. Mikey slid into the driver's seat. He didn't put up the privacy partition. He adjusted the rearview mirror, catching my eye. There was no formality in his gaze anymore, no deferential lowering of the head. He looked at me man to man, a silent acknowledgement of the trench warfare we had just fought side by side. He started the engine, the V12 purring to life so smoothly it was barely a vibration. He pulled the car away from the curb, navigating through the maze of police cruisers and news vans that had choked the driveway of the estate. We drove in silence for a long time. I watched the city pass by through the tinted windows. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold and amber. We passed the high-rise condos where my associates lived. We passed the luxury boutiques where Victoria used to spend thousands of dollars in an afternoon. We passed the banks where Blake had tried to hide his debts. It all looked different to me now. Yesterday, these buildings represented my empire. Today, they looked like elaborate cages. I rolled down the window, letting the cool night air rush in, ruffling my hair and stinging my eyes. I wanted to feel something real. I wanted to scrub the scent of expensive perfume and deceit off my skin. We were on the highway now, heading away from the city, away from the Hamptons, away from the life I had known. Mikey didn't ask where we were going. He knew. We were going back to basics. About 20 miles out, the landscape shifted. The manicured lawns and gated communities gave way to strip malls and gas stations. This was the America I had come from. This was the world I had built my logistics company to serve. Mikey slowed the car and turned into a gravel parking lot. The neon sign above the building buzzed with a rhythmic electrical hum. Joe's Diner. It was a place we had stopped at 100 times over the years, usually after long inspections at the shipping yards, when I didn't want to go home to an empty mansion. Mikey parked the Rolls-Royce next to a rusted pickup truck and a family sedan packed with luggage. The contrast was absurd. A $500,000 car sitting outside a place where the coffee cost $1. I opened my own door before Mikey could get out. I stepped onto the gravel, the stones crunching under my patent leather dress shoes. I reached up and untied my bow tie, pulling it loose and letting it hang around my neck. I unbuttoned the top button of my shirt. I took the platinum cufflinks out of my sleeves and shoved them into my pocket. I was stripping away the costume. We walked inside. The bell on the door jingled cheerfully. The diner smelled of frying onions, old coffee, and bleach. To me, it smelled like heaven. It was loud. There were truck drivers arguing about sports in the corner. There was a young couple sharing a milkshake in a booth. There was a tired waitress wiping down the counter. Nobody looked up. Nobody cared who Henry Dalton was. Nobody knew that I had just orchestrated the public destruction of a dynasty. Here I was, just an old man in a tuxedo looking for a meal. We took a booth in the back, the vinyl squeaking as we sat down. The table was slightly sticky. The menu was laminated and peeling at the corners. The waitress came over, pulling a pencil from behind her ear. "What can I get you, boys?" she asked, popping her gum. I looked at Mikey. He was grinning. "2 double cheeseburgers," I said. "Bacon, extra pickles, and a side of onion rings, and 2 chocolate shakes." "Coming right up," she said, not even blinking at the order. When she walked away, I looked at Mikey. He was leaning back, relaxed, watching the door out of habit. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The tremors were gone. "I don't have a home to go to tonight, Mikey," I said quietly. "The police are searching the estate for evidence. The penthouse is a crime scene." "You can crash at my place," Mikey said instantly. "It is small, I have a pull-out couch, but it is clean, and my mom makes a hell of a breakfast." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face in years. "I might take you up on that," I said. The food arrived. It wasn't presented on fine china. It was in red plastic baskets lined with wax paper. The grease from the burgers was already soaking through the paper. I picked up the burger. It was hot, messy, and substantial. I took a bite. The taste of charred beef, salty bacon, and melted cheese exploded in my mouth. It was better than the lobster thermidor they were serving at the wedding. It tasted like truth. It tasted like reality. I ate with a hunger I hadn't realized I possessed. I wasn't just feeding my body. I was feeding a starving soul. For years, I had been surviving on a diet of polite lies and formal dinners surrounded by people who were waiting for me to die. Now sitting in this booth with grease on my fingers, across from a man who had risked his own freedom to save mine, I felt full. I looked at Mikey as he demolished his onion rings. This man wasn't my blood. He didn't share my last name. He wouldn't inherit my eyes or my chin. But he had pulled me out of a trunk. He had stood between me and a chaotic mob. He had handed me the microphone when I had no voice. I realized then that I had been wrong about legacy. I thought legacy was about leaving money to your children. I thought it was about the name on the side of a building. But legacy is about who sits with you when the music stops. It is about who is there when the checkbook is closed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap burner phone Mikey had given me. I placed it on the table. "Mikey," I said. He looked up, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. "Yeah, boss. Tomorrow morning I want you to call Leonard. Tell him to draft a new employment contract for you." "You firing me?" Mikey asked, half joking. "No," I said. "I am promoting you. I need a partner. I am going to start over. Not a big company. Just something small. Maybe consulting. I need someone I can trust to watch my back. 50-50 split on everything." Mikey stopped chewing. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Boss, you don't have to do that. I was just doing my job." "You did more than your job, son," I said. "You gave me my life back. And I don't want to be the boss anymore. I just want to be Henry." Mikey slowly extended his hand across the sticky table. I took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and honest. "Deal, Henry," he said. We finished our meal in comfortable silence. I paid the bill with the crumpled $20 bill I found in my pocket, leaving the change for the waitress. We walked back out into the cool night air. The wind was picking up, rustling the trees at the edge of the parking lot. I looked up at the sky. The stars were visible out here away from the city lights. They looked bright and sharp. I opened the car door but stopped before getting in. I looked back at the road stretching out before us. It was dark, and I didn't know exactly where it led. I didn't know where I would live next week. I didn't know what I would do with my days now that the boardroom battles were over. But for the first time in my life, the uncertainty didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I was 69 years old. I had lost a fortune. I had lost my wife and daughter to greed. But I was standing on my own 2 feet, breathing my own air, free from the poison of false love. I got into the car. Mikey started the engine. "Where to now, partner?" he asked. I leaned back, closing my eyes, listening to the hum of the engine and the rhythm of my own beating heart. "Just drive, Mikey," I said. "Let's see where the road goes." The Rolls-Royce pulled out of the lot, its headlights cutting a path through the darkness. We drove into the night, leaving the wreckage of the past in the rearview mirror. 2 free men heading toward a sunrise that finally belonged to us. I learned that night that the poorest man is not the one without a penny, but the one without loyalty. For decades, I thought I was building a legacy, but I was only building a feeding trough for vultures. Real family is not defined by DNA or last names. It is defined by who stands beside you when you are locked in the dark. It took losing a $2 billion empire for me to find my self-respect and to find a true son in the man who drove my car. Don't cling to toxic people just because they are blood. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who really matters. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And tell me in the comments, did I go too far with the punishment, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll be reading your answers. Until next time.